The knock came just after sunset, sharp and deliberate, the kind that carried authority rather than impatience, and Daniel froze in the narrow hallway of his small rented house, the scent of reheated soup still lingering in the air as his 8-year-old daughter slept on the couch behind him, homework half finished on the coffee table, and for a moment he considered not answering at all because life had taught him that unexpected visitors rarely brought good news, especially not to single fathers barely keeping their world together. But the knock came again, firmer this time, and when Daniel opened the door, the world he had buried 20 years ago came standing on his porch in a tailored black coat, heels planted like she owned the ground beneath them, her posture calm, commanding, and unmistakably powerful, and it took him a second, then another, to recognize her eyes, because the girl he once knew had worn borrowed dresses and nervous smiles, not diamond earrings, and the quiet confidence of someone used to boardrooms going silent when she spoke, and she looked past him into the house, taking in the worn furniture, the chipped paint, the smallness of it all, before meeting his stunned gaze again, and saying in a voice smooth as glass, "Daniel Carter, I've finally found you." And his throat tightened because no one had spoken his full name like that in decades. And before he could respond, she added, "I've come to claim what I was owed 20 years ago." Words that hit him like a punch, dragging him back to a winter night long ago when a young woman named Eleanor stood shivering outside a hospital, clutching a folder of papers and a future that had just collapsed, and he remembered how he'd been the only one who stayed, the only one who believed in her when everyone else turned away, the only one who signed his name as a guarantor on a loan he could never afford so she could start over. And now here she was, Eleanor Vale, CEO of one of the fastest growing tech firms in the country, a woman whose face appeared in magazines Daniel never bought, standing in his doorway as if she had always belonged there. And when he finally found his voice, it came out rough, asking what she meant, because if this was about money, he didn't have any to give, and she smiled then, not cruelly but knowingly, stepping inside without being invited, her heels echoing softly on the floor as she said, "Relax, Daniel. I didn't come to take from you. I came to repay a debt." And as she spoke, Daniel noticed the way her eyes softened when she saw his daughter asleep, the way her gaze lingered with something like regret, and Eleanor sat at the small kitchen table like it was a negotiation room, explaining how she had searched for him for years, how every success she achieved reminded her of the man who had once sacrificed everything so she could survive, how she had never forgotten the night he chose her future over his own stability. And Daniel listened in silence, shame and pride warring inside him, because he had never told anyone about that chapter of his life, not even his daughter. And when Eleanor finally looked at him and said, "I owe you more than money, Daniel. I owe you the life I'm living," the walls he'd built to protect himself began to crack, because for the first time in years, someone saw him not as a struggling single dad, not as a man who fell behind, but as someone who had mattered. And yet fear crept in too, because powerful people didn't show up unannounced unless they planned to change everything. And as Eleanor stood to leave, handing him a business card heavier than it should have been, she said softly, "This is only the beginning. Tomorrow your life changes." And the door closed behind her, leaving Daniel staring at the card, his hands shaking, knowing deep down that whatever he had buried 20 years ago had just come back to rewrite his future. Daniel didn't sleep that night because every creak of the house felt like the echo of Eleanor's words, and by morning his world shifted in ways he never imagined. As lawyers called, documents arrived, and Eleanor returned not as a visitor this time, but as a four, revealing that the debt she spoke of wasn't symbolic but intentional, that she had quietly paid off his lingering debts, secured his daughter's education, and offered him a position within her company not out of charity but respect, explaining that the greatest repayment wasn't money but dignity. And Daniel resisted at first, pride clashing with fear, until Eleanor took him back to that winter night 20 years ago in her words, reminding him that he hadn't hesitated to help her when she was powerless, and now it was her turn to stand beside him, not above him. And as Daniel accepted, the story spread not of a billionaire helping a poor man, but of loyalty repaid, of kindness compounding over time. And Eleanor publicly acknowledged him at a company event, telling the world that success is never built alone, that behind every empire stands someone who once believed when belief was risky, and Daniel watched his daughter's eyes shine as she saw her father through a new lens, not as someone who struggled, but as someone who shaped destinies. And in that moment, he understood that the true reward of goodness isn't recognition, but the lives it touches, and Elinor, standing beside him, whispered, "I didn't come to claim what I was owed. I came to return what you gave me." And as applause filled the room, Daniel realized the quiet choices we make in the darkest moments are the ones that echo the loudest across time, proving that no act of kindness is ever truly forgotten.